Welcome back to the People Strategy Podcast. My name is Traci Austin, your host. We dive into the latest trends and best practices in talent management and organizational development. Join me as I chat with industry experts and HR leaders, business and innovators to uncover strategies that elevate you and your people. We want to thank very much Byron Lowe for talking about starting with why and the why of what we do and how that specifically impacts the business that you run. So that episode will be linked in the show notes for you to take a look at that one. And it lines directly into our conversation today with Paul McCarthy with Hero Facility Services. And Paul, I'm curious for you, why is the why of what you do so important in the work that you do?
Actually, it's very interesting that you asked that because I'm currently reading that book. And I also last night kind of broke it down in a faith aspect.
Mhm.
So it gave me goosebumps when I heard that. But the why, what I do at Hero Facility is I want to change people's lives. And some people may say, you're in sales. How are you going to change people's lives? But what I try to do every day is bring a smile to somebody, just make somebody feel better about themselves. Because it goes back to the old analogy is how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's what I think this world needs. And that's where my faith has driven me. I've had a very, very up and down faith journey. But Jesus and God have always walked beside me. And there's no accident that we're talking on Good Friday. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this really comes into play of what are our personal values and how those personal values align with the core values of the organization. Because if those two things aren't aligned, it's probably not going to be the right place for the individual that is there. So I'm curious, as you kind of look at for you, hey, my faith's incredibly important to me and the impact that I make on the folks that we work with, how that translate into the core values of the organization.
well, it's interesting because I've always said if you're not the same at work as you are at home, something's got to change. And I believe that many people are different at work because they feel they have to be different.
Mhm.
With Hero, our core values are responsiveness, ownership, communication, which is very important, consistency, and who doesn't like a little competitiveness? So when I heard those core values, those truly aligned with me, and they can also truly align with who I am in myself, my core values, because I do take ownership in everything. I take ownership in everything from my faith to my work to my family.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talk about communication, so often it's the breakdown of communication or the fear of having communication that has clarity to it with accountability that leads to breakdowns and lack of ownership and all of those other items. So that communication tenet seems to run through all of those key areas.
I've always said you have to treat people like a bank. You have to make deposits, get withdrawals. And so if you're a leader in a company and you're leading a team, somebody does something wrong. How are you going to walk up to them and I'm not going to say reprimand, but correct them if you haven't made any deposits? And it doesn't matter how big the deposit is. The deposit can be as simple as a great job because as human beings, we want to be treated like I want to be treated. I want to be treated with the thank you, the pleases, the attaboys every once in a while. It really creates a culture. And once you create that culture, it's so much easier to have those hard conversations with people.
100%. And it's so interesting because we talk about this in our leadership program, and we actually had this conversation with our current cohort this week, which is really specifically how do we build the trust? And we can't have those great conversations around accountability unless we've already built trust with that individual. So, your terminology of deposits is that trust building. And then looking at it and saying, how does this individual need to be treated? We use predictive index here with our clients, but there's also like the 5 languages of appreciation. Like, how does someone want to be appreciated? Because if we appreciate them differently than the way that they want to be appreciated, guess what? We're actually, kind of taking a step back from that, and it's not making a deposit. It can actually be pulling something out because it's not aligned with who they are. So this idea of how do we get to know our people in a true and relevant way?
It's interesting because I heard this is the first time in history that we have 5 generations in the workforce. And so it's kind of like a juggling act because each person's going to need different things. We all have our employees that you can just sit down and you can be as blunt as you want to be. But then we have those that we need a pat on the back. We need to sit them down. We need to be gentle with them. And I always tell people that the most effective leaders will water you and they'll help you grow. Bosses will stunt your growth.
Do you have an example of that? I love examples of, hey, how has this worked? And what are the times when, man, we stunted someone's growth and we didn't realize it till after the
Needless to say, I'm not huge on micromanaging. And I was working for a company where I took them the location I was at from the lowest grossing to the highest grossing. Every week we had to turn in an Excel spreadsheet and it had our actions. And it would be cold calls, it would be phone calls, it would be all these matrices. I turned this into the highest grossing location, and I have the director of sales calling me and asking me why I didn't have my 500 cold calls. And I told her, I said, let's look at what we're producing because obviously different people produce different ways. Some people love 500 cold calls. I can do 10 hardcore relationship calls, get that sale. I work smarter, not harder.
So here we're looking at focused on the outcome and having clarity over what is the outcome we're looking for and not worrying about the how we're getting to the outcome. Now, do we at times need the 500 cold calls or whatever else if we're not getting to the outcome? Sure, right?
Yes.
Like that's very helpful. If we have somebody that's not getting there, we're going to start to work with proven tactics that we have found that worked until they find their stride. Yet, this key people strategy, that we're talking about is when we focus on the outcome and have clarity of the outcome, now we're letting the person be autonomous in what they're doing in order to generate that outcome, as long as it's within the integrity and the core values and those kind of things.
Growing up in Dallas, Fort Worth, I was a kid that watched Herb Kelleher grow Southwest. And so reading the Y book right now, they talk about Southwest and they talk about how Herb approached it. And one of the things he said was, I don't have to worry about my stockholders. If I worry about my employees, the matrix and the numbers are going to be there and the stockholders are going to be happy. And if we as leaders could think that way, rather than worry about the numbers, if you build that culture and you put those people front and center, they're going to be your rock and people will run through walls for you. And so it's really, it aligns totally with how I feel about leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. So this idea of the distinction between an output and an outcome, and we talk about this a lot in our leadership program again, because an outcome is the end result. The output are what are the actions we're taking to actually generate that result. And what I hear you saying is the outputs are important, but there's different outputs we can use to get to the outcome, which is those specific numbers. Do we have to get those? Absolutely. Are they important? Absolutely. But the how of that is what's important to figure out with the individuals. Yet as leaders, so often we're looking at the outputs, the 500 cold calls, the versus the 10 relationship calls, and focus there versus focusing on the outcomes, which is X amount in revenue and sales and profitability. So the key question is, what is really most important?
Your people,
Yeah.
your people, the ones who are, I call our operations team the heart of the house for us. It's an old restaurant term because it's what we call the kitchen. We can look great as servers out on the floor in a restaurant, or as a salesperson, we can look great, but it solely depends on our back of the house and the heart of the house that are dealing with the vendors day in and day out, dealing with our customers, dealing with our partners. They're dealing with everybody, and they have to feel like they are seen.
Mhm.
And and I will do small little things for my operations team. I'll send them a gift card. I'll take them out to lunch. Little things that don't cost me very much, but it
Right.
means the world to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm curious, what do you see as your role at Hero in the journey that folks travel?
Growth. I want to help others grow to the best they can be. And it's one of those, it goes back to my core philosophy. Each time I interact with somebody on my team, I want them to grow, whether it be in confidence or knowledge. The one thing we can always steal for free and not get in trouble is knowledge.
Mhm.
So if I can share something in my fourth quarter of my life with somebody that's a little bit younger, make them better in the future, my day's done.
Amazing. And so this kind of leads right into the culture. You named your core values previously, but how would you define culture very specifically at Hero?
Culture at Hero specifically is, it's funny. So many people say, if you hear the word family, you run, but the team, and I grew up playing sports, so I'm going to use a team because families are dysfunctional. We all have them, right? So a team, you have to work together to get to the goal. And when you build that team culture, and culture is a word that I think probably back in the 90s became a big, big tag word that people used. And people have learned that you can't just call it a culture. You have to create that culture.
Mhm.
And it starts with all these little intangibles, making the deposits, making them feel warm, making them feel welcome, and thanking them for a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's culture has a ton to do with accountability, right? So we define culture as the behaviors that you allow or do not allow inside your organization. So yes, it's about the deposits because those are the behaviors, but it's also about the accountability to what is okay and not okay and ensuring that we are growing those specific behaviors to align into the results that we're producing or those outcomes.
And for me, that's where I say I'm on the front end of that because I kind of have the herd mentality is once I do those first things, the alignment in the beginning, everything's going to fall in place in the end. And I have that accountability
Yep.
because I've walked them through this. I haven't thrown them on an island and said, okay, sink or swim. I've walked them through this. And as leaders, when people see good leaders, they tend to mimic them. And so having people that you're around and talking to them, they see your heart.
Yeah.
People can see right through those people. I had a manager that I'll never forget when I was in the restaurant industry. He would walk up to me and go, "You're doing a great job." And we called it the breed nod because what he's saying is you're doing a great job. But what his head is saying is, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And so it's really just psychology when you deal with people. It's a psychology of the heart, is how I say it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you just talked a little bit or shared a little bit about, showing that example to folks. So when you bring new hires in and they're in that, first 90-day onboarding period, what is the process for you to ensure that they're a great fit to the culture and that they're, aligning within that, but it's that authentic alignment, not kind of the fake, I'm going to fake it till I make it alignment.
It's touches. It's being around and getting to know. We spend more time than our with our coworkers and our family and getting to know that person. And that's one of the huge things for me because if I'm able to walk up to you and say, little Tracy today, and you get a smile on your face.
Hmm.
And, and so fitting them in our culture is my actions because they become replicated. As a leader, like I said, people will follow you if they believe you and they trust you. And trust
Right.
is a key thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift it. We talked a lot about culture. How in those first 90 days do we know that we've hired the right fit to the role, right? So that they are actually in that right role for them, because we know if they're not, it's not probably going to work out very well.
You know, it's interesting because from my previous careers, I've done so many hires, and I've sat in trailers and opened restaurants and done hires, and talking to people, I can usually get a gut instinct, but I still have to ask those deeper questions, and I have to have the foresight to think about how is this person going to fit in with our team? How are they going to interact with their direct supervisor? So making sure that they align, that's a lot of being on the front side. But once they're in, cancer spreads. And if you do make a mistake and this person is not what you thought they're going to be, because let's face it, people are good in interviews. They can say anything you want. But if you find out that they're not fitting the culture, then you have to have sit down and heart to heart. And that's where your accountability comes in. Sitting down with them and just being honest and saying, listen, when you and I talked in your interview, you stated this. This is what I'm seeing. Can you tell me what changed between now and then?
Yeah.
And typically people, if they don't feel threatened, they'll tell you everything.
Absolutely. It's you're pulling a page out of our tough talk audit, that we, have so often with folks, which is what's the intention of that conversation, right? The intention here is we want you to win, yet it needs to be a mutual win. And here's the facts. Like, here's what was very specifically said, here's the expectations. Now we're just listening into what they are sharing with us and then determining what our next steps are.
Which ties directly into what I do in sales
Yeah.
because all I have to do is listen. If I ask the question, they'll tell me everything I need to know. But so many salesmen won't keep their mouth shut. They don't listen.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And there's those tough conversations in sales as well of what are the expectations up front so that we've really done the due diligence up front to ensure that we are a great fit for you so we don't have breakdowns on the back end.
One of the misnomers I think in sales is that everybody's your client, and not everybody is your client, and that goes. It all aligns almost like with the hiring because you're doing an interview of your potential client.
Yeah.
We've all hired client or had clients that for some reason or other we just didn't click. And I've had to fire clients. And I've had I've had one client tell me, you can't do that. And I said, I'm sorry, but I can't. And I did it in a nice way because ultimately they may come back around with a different attitude or a different culture or different needs that we can help them with. One of the things I've always learned in my life is never walk away from a situation by burning a bridge.
Mhm.
And somebody asked me, why is your network so large? I said, I never made anybody mad.
Yeah. And I think what's important there is that clarity. Here is what we can offer. Here's what we can do. Here's what those things are. Here's what winning looks like, whether it's a client relationship or an employee relationship. But when we don't have the clarity over what those outcomes are, is where the breakdowns come in. And so often we don't have that clarity.
And that's where a lot of people miss it is, and it goes back to your why. What is your why? And that's why I'm so fascinated with this book in my personal life and professional life. And this is the second time I've read it. But finding your why in a company, finding your why in your life, it's life changing. And it can be the difference between a company failing or a company succeeding. And so when you're able to get that clarity on that why, it becomes magic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, do you have an example of clarity on your why? I know we've got so many listeners that really love the tangibles of like, well, what is it? Give me an example.
I will start because I feel like everything starts with me in my personal life. So my why every day is to change one person's life. That can be something as simple as saying, be blessed. I leave every person that I interact with, whether it be somebody in a drive through or somebody I walk, just have a brief conversation with. I always say, be blessed because that's the last impression they're going to have on me of me is
Mhm.
wow. And it's different. And so it transfers to my why and work. I want to see our company succeed. And I understand that for our company to succeed, we have to have the deposits and the clarity and the understanding that we are a team, that
Yep.
we succeed and we fail together. We had a situation the other day where the ops team didn't necessarily hold up their bargain with a client. I talked to the person who was handling it and I told him, I said, let's get right back on that horse. Let's ride again. And so we gave him a brand new client without making him feel like he was nobody. We said, let's do this again. We have faith in you.
And the expectations are clear now that they may not have been before. There might be some additional support that's there for a bit until he can truly or she can truly know what that is. And that is the support that's around it to move it forward, like this idea that mistakes are springboards to success, right? Like, where do we learn our most from? Do we learn our most from our mistakes or do we learn our most from our biggest wins? Typically, we learn our most from our mistakes because that's what leads into those big wins.
It's interesting to see because I call it the fourth quarter of my life. But I see so many people as we get older. We grew up listening to our parents tell us stuff and we didn't listen. And it is true that we have to have our own failures on our own and learn our own way. And now in the fourth quarter of my life, I sit there and think, I could have made life really simple if I just would have listened. And so growing every day with the team and with your culture, it's important. Leaving a legacy, leaving an impact on people. With my boys, I always tell people I can leave them $1 million or I can leave them a legacy. And I'd rather leave them a legacy because that will last forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we start to kind of wrap up here, I have two questions that I ask all of our guests. And that first one is, what is a work bucket list item that you have for yourself this year?
My bucket list is we have three different companies. And so I'm going to call it the trifecta. I want to have a sale in each company. One of them's in Canada. One of them's strictly HVAC, and the other I've accomplished two out of the three
Okay.
right now. So it was when I came on, that was one of my first things I wanted to do because I call it a trifecta and it sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And what's a personal bucket list item that you have for yourself this year?
Personal bucket list item is for me is to actually do public speaking and share my story with people. My fourth quarter, once again, sharing and helping people grow is what I want to do. I feel called to it. And so public speaking, which by the way, is everybody's number one fear, but as you can tell, I'm not scared of it at all.
Right, right. Yeah,
So public
absolutely.
speaking is my bucket list.
I love it. So how do you combine the public speaking with hitting those sales goals?
Well, I do it daily. I think daily. I do it with LinkedIn Live
Mm.
once a month. I bring in facility managers. The facility managers are the guys kind of the ones that you never see that keep everything going. And
They're
so I shine
incredible.
this. Yeah, they
They are
they
incredible.
they make the magic happen. And so I bring them in and I put the spotlight on them, and I spend 30 minutes talking with them. They feel great when they walk away from it.
Right.
And it's also a way for me to make deposits and get to know these people because people buy from people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, when we can highlight someone's strengths and wins, I know we start just about every conversation within our team with, hey, what were your wins? And when I'm doing meetings with clients, it's, hey, what were the wins? We're shifting the culture by focusing on what the wins are. Yes, there are, mistakes or failures or whatnot that we absolutely need to process through and determine how do we get to the other side of that. Yet, if we don't follow up on the wins and celebrate those wins, they become lost in the background. And sometimes our people do as well. So I love that you're bringing those people up front and celebrating those wins publicly, as long as they want it within what their natural behavior is.
Well, I had a conversation with somebody today, and they made the comment to me that they feel overbearing. And I said, that's head trash
Yeah,
because there's only one you. So embrace it and be you. And somebody said this, I think it was Aesop's said it. It was change the way you look at things, and the things you look at will change.
100%. The mindset shift.
It's a mindset. And that's where we have a choice when we get out of bed each day. And we can either frown because we didn't get enough sleep or our spouse snored, or we can go ahead and we can live the day to its fullest. And we only have, limited time. We never know when it's going to end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if you are looking to get in touch with Paul or learn more about Hero Facility Services, we will have all of those links in the show notes. And if you're going, how do I have these tough talks that you've talked about throughout? We have our tough talk audit there for you as well. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today on the People Strategy Podcast, and we cannot wait to see you next week. Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Traci, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.